This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
Welcome, Alphas. Thanks for joining us. We have a great show for you today, whether you like it or not. Our guest is John Davis, combat vet, legislative fellow, and author of the Free Vet's Guide to Moving Abroad, a complimentary ebook for all you folks thinking about becoming expats. Did you know there are foreign and outlying posts and departments of the American Legion situated abroad that support American expat veterans? Visit AmericanLegion.org and type FODPAL in the search engine to learn more. In the meantime, today's guest, John, is going to share critical information such as healthcare and education benefits, housing and occupation opportunities, and so much more.
That was easy for you to say, wasn't it? That was a mouthful. I'm really looking forward to that. But before we dive into that and the perks of living abroad, I want to give a shout out to all my sister veterans by offering them an early happy National Vet Girls Rise Day, which is tomorrow, February 19th. And if you're not familiar with that holiday, don't despair because it's a relatively new one. It was established in 2019. And the premise is to celebrate women veterans, of course, but to also encourage women veterans to seek community support and provide long overdue recognition for their service in the military. So here's my Vet Girls Rise announcement for y'all. If you are a woman veteran or you know one, please visit Military Women's Memorial website and register today. There are 3 million women who have served. So if you know one who's near and dear to you, if you are one, be sure to get on there, have your story archived. They want to honor you. We want to honor you. We want to make sure that story, your story, is known for posterity. So let's make that happen. We'll have the Women's Memorial website in our show notes. If you want to just go type that in, womensmemorial.org. So make sure you make that happen.
Okay, Alphas, please stick around and we'll be back with John Davis right after the break.
The American Legion is raising awareness about PTSD and veteran suicide by offering hope, camaraderie, and support.
Be the one to help end veteran suicide.
Be the one to save one veteran.
Be the one to ask a veteran in your life how they're doing.
Be the one to reach out when a veteran is struggling.
Go to betheone.org and help the American Legion end veteran suicide.
Will you be the one?
All right, today we are joined by John Davis. Welcome to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
I'm pumped up to be here. Thanks, and talk about American Legion posts all over the world and veterans living abroad. Let's rock.
Nice.
Awesome. John Davis, the veteran abroad. Welcome to the show. You've not only written extensively about veterans moving abroad, but you've also lived the experience yourself. So we're definitely excited to get into that a little bit today. But before we do, I wanted to see if you could help set the stage a little bit by sharing about your time and experience in the service. And what was your initial transition plan for when you were getting out?
Sure. So I did 8 years in the 101st, which obviously always gotta rep the brand in the Army and all that stuff. I always kind of have my Army stuff on. That's one way a lot of the veterans abroad identify ourselves. When I first got out of the Army, after 8 years in the infantry, my original plan was to go to college. And that's where I started kind of my veteran advocacy stuff. And I wrote a book for student veterans because so many veterans, your first stop is college, and your success or failure there sets you up in a big part of your life. Plus, as enlisted veterans, we kind of have a different experience because we get out of the Army without the college degree, or get out of the military without the college degree. So that's something that kind of plays into it. So I wanted to help student veterans. And then I transitioned abroad in a teaching program, and I went and taught English in Thailand. And that's why I bumped into my first American Legion post. So I'm teaching English in Thailand, and the American Legion has a post outside, big American Legion side. And I walk in like, what's going on in here? And immediately get introduced to the veterans abroad stuff. So then it kind of led me on the path on talking about my generation of veterans. Iraq and Afghanistan veterans moving and living abroad. So that was kind of my...
So John, just one quick follow-up. So had you, other than your military service, had you traveled a lot as a youth, or was Thailand kind of like your first big experience outside of the military?
I grew up in Iowa, so you have to drive like 18 hours to even see the ocean, you know, when you're living in a place like that. So one thing about veterans is it just kind of got me addicted to traveling and moving. You know, I was stationed in different places, obviously deployed overseas. So that kind of gets you used to moving and living abroad and being in different cultures. So I think veterans are well suited to live abroad, but I had never really traveled like I was able to after the military. But now it's like with 100% benefits, you can fly Space A. You know, I'm medically retired, so I can fly Space A, and that's a really good benefit for veterans. And then we just like to stay on the move, I think, regardless.
Yeah. Well, hey, John, thanks for your service first and foremost. But, you know, I took the time to read through your Veterans Moving Abroad guide, which is free online, and we'll share that later. But I was really struck by your candor first and foremost, especially in the preface part of it, about your post-military experience. It really resonated with me, particularly regarding your identity crisis. And I want to just share a little quote with the Alphas so we get a feel for it. You said, "Feeling lost is a terrible feeling, especially when you feel out of place in your own hometown." You said, "I ended up in a place called Veteran Purgatory, where I wasn't in the military anymore, but I wasn't comfortable in American civilian life. To find myself, I had to first lose myself. I ended up living in the Dominican Republic, where somehow I felt more at home, at peace than ever. I started sleeping through the night, connecting with nature, and improving my mental health." It was so powerful because I definitely have felt that myself. Can you talk to me a little bit about where you were in your headspace at that time and the personal evolution you were going through?
For me, I struggled a lot until I kind of got abroad, and then I realized kind of the unhealthy way that American society kind of is. You know, we're put in this position where we're taught to just work, work, work kind of until we die. And that's what I did in the military. I never really knew how to take care of myself. So after the military, I think every veteran goes through this extremely personal kind of like transition process, because you can't be who you were before the military because that person doesn't exist. You can't be who you were in the military because obviously that person was operating in different context. So you have to figure out who you're going to be into the future. And so I kind of developed this personality where I threw myself in unhealthy behaviors, into drugs, into alcohol. I got addicted to a lot of the pills the VA gave me. I got addicted to riding my motorcycle too fast. I think my brain kind of was rewired from the combat experiences as a teenager in Afghanistan. And the first mission that veterans have to really undertake is finding out just who the hell you're going to be when you take off the uniform. And unfortunately, it's a very complicated process, and everyone has to kind of do it themselves. Like there's no transition guide for this thing.
Yeah. So talk to me a little follow-up really quick. Talk to me a little bit about that moment you found that peace. What was that like for you?
I was watching the sunset, having a glass of wine, which as Americans, like you don't really have time to watch the sunset. You're always rushing from one place to another. And I was sitting there with some veteran friends of mine, and we were just sitting there watching the sunset, and just, you kind of hit that moment of peace where you're like, take a deep breath. I mean, how often do we just take a deep breath and feel gratitude? And so that's one thing that it really hit me. And then eventually, like I mentioned, I ended up not needing or kind of stopping taking a lot of PTSD medication that I had been on for years. I started kind of disconnecting from some of the unhealthy behaviors that I was participating in, you know, in America, and just kind of finding myself. And here in Dominican Republic, it's interesting. We have 20,000 American veterans that live here. And a lot of people are extremely shocked to hear that. We have veteran health care specifically for us on the island. So one of my missions with the moving abroad stuff was not just to talk about, oh, you can have a cheaper life here because my rent is $500, but to talk about how veterans can get their health care abroad through things like the foreign medical program of the Veterans Administration. That a lot of people have no idea how it works, how it operates. A lot of people have no idea that there are American Legion posts in Mexico, in Costa Rica, in Panama, in Germany, in France, in Thailand, in the Philippines, and all over the world. The first foreign post was actually in France in 1919 for the American Legion. And now, 15,000 veterans are 100% living abroad and getting care through the Veterans Administration. So a lot of those things kind of exist. So I wanted to really talk about the nuts and bolts of that. And that's why I got tired of answering people's questions. So I was like, I'm just going to write this down. So I just tried to put it all there. Yeah. Of course, people still ask you questions. They're still like, oh, how do I do this? How do I do that? And it's just like, just read it. Just read it, but that's how veterans are.
John,
and then you come on here and we make you do it again.
Yeah, John, I think the next thing is to narrate that shit.
This is stuff I want to do because, I did find a higher quality life at a cheaper cost abroad. And I wanted to share that with other veterans because not everyone's journey is going to be the same. I mean, I'm 38, no wife, no kids, no problems. So it's easy for me to transition abroad. But I've been super surprised how many veterans with families are interested in things like international education outside the United States. How many single females are interested in moving abroad as well? Because if you take your 100% VA disability or VA compensation and you move to the Philippines, you are a top 1% earner in the Philippines. And imagine how you can live as a top 1% earner. Because in the States, to be top 1%, you have to make like $700,000 a year. You don't get rich serving in the military. You don't get rich working for the government unless you're in office, I don't think. But so for veterans, financial health is mental health. And when I stopped worrying about how am I going to pay my bills, how am I going to figure all this out, my life got infinitely better and more peaceful.
Yeah.
You went into this open-minded though, and that's not something that everybody can do. And I found that if you go into situations, new friendships and things like that, willing to be vulnerable again, which is not an easy thing to do, you find some really incredible people. I want to give props to these two that, when we all got together, we'd not spent this kind of time. I'd never met Adam before. And it's really great when you find yourself surrounded by the right people. And I was on your Instagram page listening to Sylvester Hurt or Rico, as he's called. And he said something I watched this last night and it's been twirling around in my head. I've not been able to stop thinking about it. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing and adding context here, but after talking about the military and more specifically, he said, you never really shuffle yourself back into that deck of cards that is the United States, talking about the society. You always stand out like a card flipped over. And I mean, even reading that out loud, it just gave me chills again, because it's such a profound way to show how it feels without sounding dramatic. People don't realize, we've seen some things, we've done some things, whatever. People just don't get it. And you don't, and weirdly, you don't say that because you want them to. You're willing to feel disconnected from people around you so that other people don't have to go through those things. But when you heard that, did it hit you as hard as it did me? And how do we find that balance between being that flipped over card, but still feeling connected and not losing that incredible experience that we had, and being able to sort of blend that into being a flipped over card in the deck? Because no matter where you go, you're going to be a flipped over card once you've seen the things and done the things that we've done.
For me, when I first got out of the military, I totally shook off my military identity. I didn't want to talk about the military. I didn't want to go to veteran organizations. I didn't want anything to do with it. And then after a period of time, after I kind of found myself again, I re-embraced it. So I always tell veterans, you have to shake it off like a snake shedding its skin, and then kind of re-embrace it in a way that works for you. And Rico is part of our creative veteran group down here. He actually leads a group of 12 veterans, and we meet weekly and talk about the creative stuff that we're doing, because creativity is a form of therapy as well. So we have these organizations and these groups for veterans here in the Dominican Republic, because there's 20,000 of us. Last month, we went and did a cigar tour factory together. We had a bonfire on the beach. So kind of forming that community abroad is sometimes easier than in the States, because you're so, like you mentioned, disconnected. And I think that the first thing veterans have to do is just shake it off, and then re-embrace it, because that veteran mentality, that identity is in your DNA. It's not something that you can just ignore.
Well, I have 4 kids and a wife, so I have 5 problems, 6 if I include myself. But I mean, that idea, I think, calls to everybody at some point. That's beautiful,
Yeah,
man. I love it.
and America is the country that people come to, like the American dream. But I don't think it's like offensive to say, hey, the American dream might not be what it used to be. And a lot of veterans in the United States are struggling with things like the high cost of living, with things like the unhealthy quality of food. And that's one thing, you come here in Dominican Republic and the quality of food is a lot fresher. And your stomach is kind of like a second brain. So if you're eating unhealthy food, and veterans tend to lean towards unhealthy mentality. I mean, I used to drink a Red Bull, throw a dip on my mouth,
everything,
and then go rough and work out, when I was in the Army. So veterans tend to live kind of unhealthy to begin with. And then you take some of those unhealthy concepts of American society. And one thing that I do talk about is I grew up in Iowa, and then the Army sent me to be a recruiter in New York City when I was going through my military retirement. And going to New York City was like an extremely big culture shock. I felt unsafe constantly. And this was right when I got back from Afghanistan. It's pollution, stress, no nature. So those kind of concepts, when it comes to American cities, I think can be really unhealthy for veterans.
Well, John, I'd like to dig into your books a little bit and talk a little bit about your processes. One of my favorite podcasters and authors that I was first introduced to when I was getting out in 2015 was Tim Ferriss. So he had the 4-hour work week, which picking up some of those vibes from you as well, and how you've
like his fear list, how he talks about
the
doing your fears and all that. Brilliant guy.
Yeah, and then the other thing I really like about Tim, at least Tim and his podcast, at least in the early days, 2015, 16, when I was listening, was how he kind of dissected the processes and tips from those that he had on there or himself. So from that perspective, you've written several impactful resources for veterans, from guides to affirmations. Can you walk us through, like, what is your process for that now that you're living abroad and you're on the go? So how do you take something from initial idea to publication?
For me, I wanted to fill needs. Like, I didn't want to be one of those military people that kind of does the same kind of leadership bullshit, if you pardon that, that a lot of veterans do. And I'm also not, like, I didn't do anything that fancy in my military career. I think a lot of us tend to like look at the military and be like, oh, Navy SEAL, Green Beret. Well, most of us were not that. I was an infantry guy in Afghanistan. I was a private. I had no idea what I was doing at any time, during my combat deployments. So I wanted to be a veteran kind of for normal veterans. And the reason that I wrote my book for student veterans is because it didn't exist. There wasn't a book for student veterans, which to me seemed crazy, because how many veterans get out of the military and immediately go to college? So I wanted to write a guide for veterans, like, this is how you do it. And I did that while I was working in a VA work study program, because I went from dropping out of community college when I was like 18 to going to and getting a master's degree from Harvard on the back end, because I learned that college is kind of like the military. You just do what they say. They say, read this, do this. So I wanted to tell veterans how to embrace your military mentality in the classroom, because a lot of us go to classrooms and feel so out of place, kind of like Joe mentioned, the outside deck or the deck of cards flipped over, because you feel lost and surrounded by 18-year-olds when I was 30. So I saw that. And then also affirmations is something that really helped me, like saying positive affirmations to myself in the mirror. So I looked, and there's nothing out there for veteran affirmations. There's nothing out there for us. So I wrote a book, 365 Days of Veteran Affirmations, that has an affirmation every day from January 1st to December 31st, written specifically for veterans. But then I realized, a lot of veterans, maybe the Marines, or maybe they can't read, or maybe they're not going to read. So now we're in the process out here of, maybe we're in the process of creating a YouTube channel for veteran affirmations, where it's just going to be spoken word affirmations that you can listen to on YouTube or on Spotify. So I'm creating that with a group of veterans that live here, because one of the things I think we have to do as veterans is continue to be there for not only ourselves, but one another.
I just want to jump in right here and say one thing real quick, if I can. You mentioned the affirmations, and that's really hard to do for some people. But one thing that I think really helped me more than anything with myself, my feeling of self-worth in the past 2 years, is I've stopped calling myself stupid for any reason whatsoever.
That's probably true.
I've stopped saying things like, I'm, forgive it, but in the military, I'm retarded, or you gotta stop trash talking yourself, because it has so much more power than you think it does.
100%.
And that, and accepting compliments by just saying thank you, because I started realizing there's a weird sort of narcissism in rejecting compliments. It's like saying, I'm not worthy of your observations. And I'm sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to add that in, because not everybody can look themselves in the eyes and be like, doggone it, you're worth it. But everybody can stop talking bad about themselves.
Well, it's a good point, Joe. But I also wanted to highlight something. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, just kind of say what Joe said. As veterans, we tend to be overly sarcastic. We tend to use dark humor. We tend to talk down to ourselves. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that affirmations can be especially powerful for as a mental health tool for veterans, because like you mentioned, especially in the military, you're talked down to immediately from when you put on the uniform. I mean, you're made to feel pretty bad about yourselves a couple of times, So I think
it's a love language.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Adam, but yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So one of the things that stood out from what you were sharing, though, in addition to what Joe just highlighted, is that everybody's got a story to tell. And I have a really good friend, Kelsey Sharon. She's got the podcast Brass and Unity, and she wrote her book. And we were having this conversation. She was just like, Adam, it shouldn't only be the Navy SEALs that write books and make movies. We have more stories, to tell than that. And another thing that I hear from you, John, is just kind of doing an assessment in a landscape of like what currently exists, and then mapping that to your own personal experiences, and also what you like to do and what's interesting to you. And so through that, you kind of made this formula and process for this area for you to create and produce something that wasn't there. And so I think that's really cool, just kind of listening to how you arrived at that. So with that being said, just a brief follow-up, what tip would you offer to veterans who might be kind of reflecting on their story? Maybe they have an idea and they're just maybe have a little bit of the self-doubt, or maybe they're not being able to give themselves the right affirmations like Joe was talking about, to be able to cross that threshold into creation and producing.
That's a great question, and I'm super happy you asked it, because on my website, I have writing prompts for veterans. So this is something where I think more veterans should tell their stories. I think so many normal stories go kind of untold, and I think that a lot of, even the people that I knew who are closest with, like my mother had no idea my military experiences. My friends had no idea my military experiences. So how could they treat me? They didn't know how to treat me, because I didn't really tell my story, because we're told to kind of like, except if you're a Navy SEAL, you're told to always kind of like give credit away in the military, like it's all a team thing and that type of thing. So I wanted to help veterans tell their stories, because I, had been a writer. I'd written books, I'd written articles, and all these veterans I felt like had these awesome stories to tell. So on my blog, I give platforms for veterans. If they want to write an article, they can write an article. Like I just had a female veteran who is using her GI Bill in Mexico write an article about that experience. But then I have on my prompts for veterans, it's just like a free printout sheet where it's like, what would you change about the military? And then that can kick veterans off into a whole kind of conversation. Hey, what did you need from the VA that they didn't give you? What can the American Legion and veteran organizations do better? You start asking questions like this and veterans start talking. That's why podcasts like this are very valuable. And I think veterans should do what they can to record their kind of average stories of people like mechanics, cooks, fuel operators, these types of stories, to get out there into the world, because veterans do have not only something to offer society, but each other. One of the big problems in America is the gap between the military and civilian populations. And this is not only a problem for the military as we feel isolated, but a problem for society, because as they drift away from the military, they drift away from military values like discipline, values like respect. How many veterans get out? They're like, nobody respects anyone. Everyone talks the way they want to. Values like service, which are incredibly important, especially as we move into a more individualistic and technology-based society. So I think your average American is actually the one who's severely damaged when they don't know anyone in the military. Long answer, but
Wow.
that's but veterans should tell their stories.
No, we love it, man.
So for somebody who's considering moving abroad, can you give like maybe just your number one tip for somebody who's even considering it when they're doing a little bit of self-reflection? What should they be looking at about themselves personally? Is it finances? Should be more introspection personally, like where they at mentally, mental health wise, physical, like all of the above? I know you've got a pretty extensive checklist, but if there's a number one thing they should look at that would be a make or break, what would that be?
I would ask veterans, are you currently happy in your environment? If the answer is no, then the environment has to change. And I don't know what that means. It might mean you have to get out of a relationship. It might mean you need to quit your job. It might mean you need to move to a different city. A lot of us, if you're not happy in your environment, you have to change it. And that might mean a million and one things. But moving abroad is something I think people don't really consider. So I wanted to tell more American or more veterans, like, this is a possibility, especially when you have American legions in places like Costa Rica, in places like Mexico, where you can go and connect with veterans. And those can be great resources for veterans who want to move abroad. I was in Puerto Vallarta a few months ago with the American Legion there, and they have a community of like 150 Iraq and Afghanistan veterans who live there on the beach in Mexico and have connections with like the Coast Guard who comes down to dock there. So I think the financial thing is obviously the most important. Like, I have a guide for the financial planning for moving abroad, which is important because you don't want to come to a different country and not have enough money to support yourself. But if you're 100% rated from the VA, you could live a high quality life in a lot of different countries. And one thing that I realized was kind of how little I need to be happy and at peace. Especially, I think it's kind of more so, sometimes for men. Like, I'm happy if I have Netflix, a flat screen TV, and I can walk to the beach. That's really all I need. Like, what else could I possibly need? So I'd say the financial aspect.
Maybe HBO and Max.
Yeah, you got $10
Could that
a month,
evaluation could the evaluation and change of one's environment be as simple as you said, changing the environment of your household? Could that be domestic, or does it actually have to be as extreme as moving to a different country?
Yeah, I think as little of change in environment is definitely start small. I don't think moving abroad is for everyone. And I certainly don't think that every veteran should do it or should even consider it. My mission is more just to provide information and resources for those that might be inclined to do so. So I do talk to veterans, especially, if I do like Zoom meetings, like, is this for you? And a lot of the times the answer is no, but it's still something to consider. A lot of people are doing things like waiting until the kids graduate high school, because the American dream for like my mother's generation was to retire to Florida. But now that's kind of expensive. Like, your average middle class person cannot afford like a nice condo in Florida, but you can absolutely buy a condo in Costa Rica or Guatemala or someplace like that and have a high quality life. It's so many veterans get out of the military. They do 20 years and then they immediately go back to work again because they have to. And I know so many veterans who are living these high quality lives abroad that I wanted to help bring that kind of to the world. So that's when I started posting on social media and being like, hey, I live in the Dominican Republic. This is the benefits of it. And I was kind of surprised at the outreach I got from people, how interested people were in the idea.
So sort of working backwards from where maybe I should have started. I was hurt in Fallujah, Iraq in 2004. I lost my left leg. I was a corpsman with 2-1 Marine. So I'm loving the Marine jokes, man. Having said that, I love it, man. I love it. It's such a sort of fun environment when you're there with a group of people and everybody knows they love each other. It just, you can have a lot of fun. But I personally had the pleasure of visiting Costa Rica. This being the 20th year anniversary, September was the 20th year anniversary of my injury. I knew I needed to have a year to focus on what I wanted to do. So I buckled down. I went to Costa Rica with a group of fellow authors, friends of mine, and finished writing my book. I did music. I did all these things. And I realized that when I was over there, that feeling of belonging that I don't always feel even when I'm at home. And I love my home. I've got land. I got a creek back there. It was weird to feel that in such a strange place, to be so different in location wise. And so part of that, I think, was the people I was with. Again, I mentioned that earlier, surrounding yourself with the right people. But it wasn't a homesickness when I missed my family. It was wishing that they were there with me. It was wanting to bring them into that. And so what I wanted to ask is you did mention some places that you've gone that gave you some of that peace. But I wanted to ask what it's like for families when they decide to do something like that. I'm not specifically looking to do anything like that for myself, but I think that there's a lot of guys and gals right now that, like you mentioned, it's tough. Things are 30% more expensive than they were in 2015. And most of us, if you've been in a job, you are in a worse financial situation. No matter if you've gotten normal raises since 2015, you're in a worse financial situation than you were in 2015. What about families? Do you feel like, and some of your Instagrams, you're like, you feel safer because the, cities and things like that, they don't feel like safe places for some people. What are some of places that you think families could possibly gravitate to?
Costa Rica is a really
get
good
that
one.
sort of feeling of peace.
Costa Rica is a really good one, and they actually have a very strong Marine Corps League there. So the president of the Marine Corps League there in Costa Rica is a friend of mine who I've gone there, and I think a lot of people are a little surprised that private international education is often superior to American public education. I think we tend to think of ourselves as like the smartest and the best, but if you go to international schools, they're in Costa Rica, their mode of teaching is going to be in English, and it's the same accreditation. You can go to American colleges and things like that. And then as far as, I think, Joe, what you said about the conversations you can have when you find yourself outside of your kind of normal space, because we're so wrapped up into our daily lives that when you get somewhere like Costa Rica, and especially you're around a group of other veterans, you can have these conversations that you would never have sitting at Applebee's somewhere in America, that you would never have, because everyone's kind of like rushing around and doing things. So that's why I think retreats are also a really good idea for veterans. I recently went to Peru and did ayahuasca, and that was like a really cool experience for me, because you're in an environment that's like healing. And I think so much of the Veterans Administration isn't really what I want healing to be. And that's kind of where veterans were thrown into. And then to kind of talk about, especially as someone who's been injured, the hardest conversation I ever had with the veterans living abroad stuff was with a guy who was paraplegic. So he was paralyzed from the neck down and from an explosion in Iraq. And he had 2 daughters and a wife. He told me his VA compensation and Social Security disability wasn't really enough for them to live comfortably, and his wife had to take care of him. So it's hard for her to work. He was asking me about wheelchair access abroad and kind of those type of benefits. And it just, it like makes me emotional now, because you're looking at a guy who lost his whole body, in Iraq, getting like $8,000 a month from the government, which is not enough in America. And he's looking at, maybe I could take my family to another place. And that guy should just be given like $30,000 a month from the United States government for the rest of his life, hands down. So when I see so many veterans out there who are like struggling to pay the bills, who are struggling to find that financial health, and then I'm like, well, you got 3 kind of options, or 2 main options when it comes to improving your financial health. 1, you can make more money, or 2, you can spend less, or 3rd, you could just change environments to where everything's cheaper. So I think that's something that a lot of veterans are kind of going into, especially if you have your military benefits and you have your military retirement. Like, you don't need to struggle if you want to come down to the Dominican Republic, hang out on the beach and scuba dive and play golf.
See, I love that, man. I love your attitude. I love the idea behind what you're saying, which is go where you find peace. And it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
It may not be abroad, but what you're really saying here is change your environment to a place that drops your stress.
Mhm.
And that's what I love and support. And hey, it may be Dominican Republic, it may be Costa Rica, but I think that I would encourage people to visit, because just like if you've never watched a sunrise in the western deserts of the US, you haven't seen everything that the US has to offer. And you really do need to see more of God's creation before you die. If you do nothing else, you should see what this world has to offer.
And
And
travel
I
is
just want
therapy.
to
I mean,
comment a little bit
travel is
about
therapy.
Yeah.
well, it really is. And I wanted to just comment about kind of the last thing that you said, John. And I think one of the reasons that travel is therapy is because, you're forced to get outside of your environment. So it's a catalyst for change, right? And so you're kind of breaking that normal, thought pattern, choice pattern, action, emotion experience. And so it's a bit of the journey. But then once you get there and once you're able to start decompressing and start finding yourself and finding your purpose, or maybe even have an experience like the ayahuasca one that you said that you had in Peru, a lot of veterans are finding access to these medicines and these therapies and these different ways of doing things. And what I think, I'm also director of operations for a coalition that helps advocate for these things. And we were just at the Army-Navy game. Joe and I were broadcasting the show, and we had a chance to talk to the executive director for the legislative affairs for the Legion. The number one priority this year for their legislative agenda is winning the war within. So this is a really cool thing where, those posts that you're talking about and the ability to like be out front leaders advocating for these things in safe ways, and being able to do that under the banner of the Legion is so wonderful. And that's, one of the reasons that it was founded, to be able to support and drive those changes, those things that you're not seeing at the VA. We talk about it all the time on this show. I mean, we celebrate the wins, but we also, call out the challenges that are faced. And so I think when people have the chance to break from their fight or flight stressors that are constantly plaguing, their subconscious program, to be able to find some peace and relief, and then you start rebuilding yourself into like who you're supposed to be, serving your purpose. And then one of the things that our community is so built for is service. And so what does that look like? And if there's all these problems out there, how can we stand up, organize, just like you, being able to say, well, you know what, nobody's writing about these things, so I should be able to provide some commentary, some help and support, so that other people don't have to go through the same things. And I just, hats off to you for seeing that, for doing it, for making a way, and then helping to inspire others along the way, because I think that's a large part of what it's about for us.
Yeah, I do want to, kind of mention again before we finish up, like the American Legion posts around the world, because I've attended American Legion meetings, and like we talked about Costa Rica, Joe, I've attended American Legion meetings in Thailand, and the Philippines, and in Mexico, because there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of veterans that live all over the world. And these veterans are the supportive community that maybe a lot of people are looking for when they get out of the military.
It's awesome, man.
Thanks. John, it's been a real treat chatting with you. Is there anything that you'd like to share that maybe the alphas need to know, or something that we missed, other than you're talking about the posts that are abroad?
Yeah, I do have. So, like I mentioned, I got tired of people asking me so many questions. So I just eventually, first I started writing a blog article about veterans in the Dominican Republic, and I listed the veteran resources here. So we actually have medical facilities specifically for veterans in the Dominican Republic. A block away from the beach, you go get chiropractic care, go to the beach. I mean, it's that type of a life. There are no waiting times for appointments here. So if I want a medical appointment or mental health appointment, I'm going to get that tomorrow. And then around the world, there are a lot of great opportunities for veterans. So my free guide for veterans moving abroad gets into kind of everything you need to think about when you're moving abroad, things like the banking, the post office, kind of all those kind of things that you kind of have to do. But veterans are pretty well versed in moving. A lot of us transitioned to Germany, to Italy, to Japan, to Korea throughout our military careers. And then on my blog, I also have country guides on different veteran-friendly countries. So I have one on like Mexico, Thailand, Colombia, Germany, and other places where veterans are at. So if you are a veteran abroad and you want to connect with me. You know, we're starting to have monthly events here in the Dominican Republic. We have our first one of the year on the 29th at a local bar here. And there's going to be about 40 to 50 veterans who live here in Dominican Republic full-time who are there. And we all connect and support each other and network and go to the gym together, the beach together. So there is a great community of veterans abroad that I'm working with other veterans to build.
I think that's awesome. Alphas, you can get John's free ebook at his website, John Davis Writer. That's WRITER, because he is a writer.com. That's johndaviswriter.com. And while you're there, you can find his social media handles where you can connect and stalk this guy, because he's got a wealth of information. You'll also find that information in our show notes. So be sure to connect with John, whether you're stateside or abroad. This guy is an amazing veteran. You don't want to miss out. So, John, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks. We'll have to do the next one
John,
from here
thanks
by
so
the
much.
beach.
That's right. Thanks so much for coming. I hope folks will stop by and check out all your awesome resources. Thanks for visiting us. Alpha, stick around for some scuttlebutt after the break.
A veteran is a veteran.
A veteran is a veteran.
A veteran is a veteran.
The American Legion embraces all current and former members of the military and endeavors to help them transition into their communities.
We are Veterans Strengthening America.
We are the American Legion.
Okay, Alphas, we hope that you had a fantastic break, like a suspiciously good break. Like you're sitting there thinking, did I forget something? Today has been too easy. Because now it's time for some scuttlebutt.
All right. According to an article in Stars and Stripes, a new bill would make it easier for veterans who signed secrecy oaths for covert ops to obtain back benefits. That's right. In Washington, out of Washington, rather, veterans who signed secrecy oaths that keep them from disclosing to doctors or anyone else the nature of injuries connected to covert operations could seek benefits retroactive to their discharge date under a bill before Congress. This obligation, the obligations to Aberdeen's Trusted Heroes Act, or the Oath Act, would lift a mandate that requires veterans to apply for benefits within 1 year of leaving military service to receive compensation dating back to their discharge. The restriction would be waived for former service members who participated in secrecy oath programs that prevented them from disclosing a mission or seeking benefits for service-connected illness or injuries. Sponsored by Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat out of Connecticut, the legislation specifically identifies Vietnam-era service members who were human test subjects from the mid-1950s to the early 1970s in Army experiments using chemical warfare agents and hallucinogenic drugs.
I have a friend of mine that was one of those experiment guys. His name's Steve Rogers.
How's he doing?
Wait, was that your dad, Joe? Because that explains a lot.
No. I think he's a captain now.
Oh my God, Joe! I just put it together. My brain is a little slow.
Captain America. That's you? Okay.
Yeah, way too much. Oh, man.
Government-employed scientists, including former Nazi Germany scientists, Captain America, tested mustard agents, psychedelics, nerve agents, and other dangerous chemicals according to legislation. Service members in experiments at the former Edgewood Arsenal Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland were sworn to secrecy and threatened with court-martial or criminal charges if they violated it. Upon leaving service in the Army, veterans of the program could not seek benefits provided by the Department of Veteran Affairs for disabilities relating to the program without violating their secrecy oaths, according to the legislation. So this is about as bad as it gets. Not only are we going to subject subjugate you to the worst of this. You can never talk to anybody about it, and you cannot get any help for it.
Yeah.
That's rough.
Wow.
That's really rough.
By secrecy oath, the military was referring to any non-disclosure agreement that prevented service members from disclosing or discussing covert missions. I was thinking like, James Bond type stuff, so although he was MI6, but they're talking about these
like Bay of Pigs type stuff.
After leaving the military, what are you saying, Stacey?
No, they were like, we ran out of lab rats. Hey, can you go get some E2s? That would be great. Make sure they sign some waivers, though.
Yeah, secrecy.
Jeez.
If this is signed into law, the Oath Act would codify this decision for Edgewood veterans, allowing them to avoid litigation and inconsistent outcome between cases, and enable veterans who served in other secrecy oath programs to backdate their benefits. So, this is kind of like a worst case scenario of what the military has done. And also, on the advocacy front for the medicinal side of these, hallucinogenic therapies that have, benefits far beyond what the military was using them for. It set us back 60 years.
Yeah.
Because the manner in which they did that, the trust that was betrayed in the American people, and then how they, the counterculture that emerged to just shut all that down.
And I don't want to give them too much credit for that this is fantastic, but I feel like a lot of the stuff has been declassified. And I feel like if it wasn't, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I don't think that that's fair. I'm glad that it's better to be late, and, we'll give the VA credit where, when it's due, coming out of Washington and stuff like that. But a lot of this stuff is declassified now. So it's so easy for them to make a decision like this now, when really this is something that should have been taken care of decades ago.
I do take offense to them lumping in psychedelics alongside mustard gas and irradiations and other dangerous chemicals. That seems unfair. Anyway, carry on.
No, I agree with that as well. And look, at the end of the day, like, what are we talking about? Like, some things were done. Well, this specific example that was provided in the article is talking about, all the egregious things that were done to bind somebody to a secrecy oath to prevent them from getting the. I think that's more like the problem that we're talking about, as opposed to like the other clandestine, operations and things that one has to do to, execute, whatever the government and the military determines, is what we need to do. And I think like folks that fall into that category, as opposed to these, human experimentation ones, is seemingly like a little bit different to me. But at the end of the day, like, what are we talking about? Like, doing the right thing, like ensuring that people are afforded the opportunity to get the care, that they deserve. So, look, steps in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. And if you want to read up on the article, we'll have the link to the Stripes article. But Joe, what do you got for us?
As a new congressional session begins, as it looms over us like a umbrella of safety, we hope, of progress, of I don't know, of something. At a time where bipartisan working relationships seem rare, a group of military veterans in the U.S. House of Representatives is banding together across party and ideological lines. According to a story from Associated Press, the group, calling themselves the Four-Country Caucus, are veterans with a wide range of military experience who hope to show there's still spaces where people with different views can come together. We're trying to lead by example, both within Congress and to show our colleagues that this is possible, but also to America more broadly, said Colorado Democrat Jason Crow, who's one of the outgoing co-chairs of the caucus. People only get deluged with the crazy aspects of Congress and the things that don't work, and the people yelling and screaming, Crow said. We just don't get as much attention when we're actually working together. The caucus began in 2019 to bridge the divides that plague Washington and slow its effectiveness, said Steve Womack, a Republican member of the caucus from Arkansas, or Arkansas for those Arkansas natives, and a retired colonel in the Army National Guard, bringing together people who see themselves as sharing a commitment to putting country and mission first seem like a starting point to maybe advance some agendas that would be good for our country, Womack said. Deadlines, comfort with high-pressure situations, and a focus on common goals create a kind of warrior ethos, he said. So, first of all, I think that this is fantastic. I think that not only this, we need more veterans, people that have fully given to the government. I think have a special place in being able to help be a part of its growth and a part of its leadership. And so, I mean, what do you guys think about this?
So we briefed them last year. So we went and gave our coalition. We gave a presentation on breakthrough therapies for veterans. So I would just say we need more of it, and we need caucuses and committees like this. We need leaders willing to step up and do it differently and just not be beholden to the funds and the money, as opposed to the impact and the service to the districts or the people that they're representing. Because we talk about this all the time. There's so many things that need to be changed and reformed, and we have a lot of things that aren't serving the masses in the way that they need to. And so we need to think about doing things differently. We need to think about how we can show up in a more unified way. And I really applaud, initiatives like this that are willing to be different in a time when status quo is the ruling power.
Yeah. Well, we talked to Ry Barcott last season,
Yeah.
episode 204, if you guys want to go back and listen to that interview that we did with Ry Barcott. And he's, kind of the brainchild behind the 4-country caucus. But anyway, the thing for people like me, I'm neither Republican and I'm not Democrat. And it really chaps my hide when people put their party before progress and before the needs of, say, veterans issues and things like that. It drives me freaking crazy. So I love the commitment that they're making, particularly the 4-country caucus, and saying like, hey, let's do the right thing for the people because it's the right thing to do. And if we can just keep that mentality that the progress for our nation is more important. I love setting that mentality forward. I think that's what our country's all about. Is somebody once said to me that compromise is when people both parties walk away unhappy. So,
I mean, that's fair. And it seems to be working, though, because since then, the group has been integral in getting more than 100 bills passed into law. The legislation includes such areas as national security, strengthening the military, veterans issues, national service, and supporting military families, especially those who have lost loved ones. We are a small but mighty caucus that punches way above its weight, Crow said. Members sit on a number of committees together and meet regularly, including breakfast briefings, which I have not been invited to twice a month. Recently, those briefings have included the heads of the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Space Force, as well as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Other guests have spoken about national service, such as the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, and Voices for National Service. We believe really strongly that one of the ways to bring Americans together is to get Americans to work together again, Crow said. And that doesn't have to be in the military. He said people also can find common ground by serving their communities. And I'm 100% behind that. I love local businesses. I love local service. I love people that have a heart for giving and serving. I love to see these kids that get involved with nonprofits, whether it's like third-party fundraising and things like that. With America's Vet Dogs, there's loads of like small, like people who want to raise money for us for their birthday, and that kind of stuff shows good leadership in the home and a good heart. And I love that stuff. I love getting, working from the ground up and taking care of your local community. And that is service. That is service to me. But their staff members also meet, and the representatives have some functions off Capitol Hill, including washing the black granite walls of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Crow, a former Army Ranger who served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and his co-chair, Texas Republican Tony Gonzalez, a retired Navy Chief Petty Officer, will hand over the leadership to Texas Republican Jake Elzey, a former A-18 pilot, or pilot's real, and Air Force Academy alumni Don Davis, a North Carolina Democrat. So what do you think about that,
if he was
buddy?
a helicopter pilot, obviously.
Yeah, it would be cooler. That whoop, 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 whoop. Is that what you listen to in your ears
Can we
when you go
get
to
some more
sleep every night?
helicopter pilots in Congress and the Senate? I mean, seriously.
That's Adam's white noise for bedtime. Is that?
Yeah, I was about to say we got Tammy Duckworth. She's a rock star. So Edward Crawford, a co-founder of War Veterans Fund, which recruits Republican war veterans to run for Congress, has had several candidates join the caucus after winning their races. In a polarized world, in a very polarized country, we veterans have to work with everybody, he said. You go into combat, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, it doesn't matter. You're getting shot at. We're working together. You're covering each other. Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. A Navy veteran himself, Crawford said that while his organization centers on Republican prospects, he refers Democrats to his counterpart as a group called With Honor Action, because that nonpartisan organization promotes veterans from both parties for elective office. We want them to be successful too. We want both sides of the aisle to get more veterans. And pushing specific ideologies is not part of its purpose, Crow said. Finding common ground, even in disagreements, is. We're not going to take an all or nothing mentality, because we know that when people take an all or nothing mentality, Americans end up with nothing, he said. And that's just not acceptable for us.
Look, my thing is they have a good blueprint, and it shouldn't just reside in the halls of Congress. You know, it shouldn't just be this, this caucus. The principles of what you just said there should all veterans should take to heart and apply in their own life and in their own circle in one capacity or another, because we come from a profession that is so diverse, a melting pot representation of the United States. And in order, and all units are different, but, for the most part, the military is able to overlook all those things and be able to achieve a unified, objective or goal. So that's what the experience that we have that's so invaluable, those leadership, traits and characteristics that can be applied anywhere. And I think, that, so it's cool to see what they're doing. And then it's like, okay, so what does that mean for me? How do I apply that in my own life?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have show notes, our links in the show notes. We're going to have show notes. I don't know if you guys know that.
Show notes.
There will be notes.
We're adding in show notes to this episode. That's a big announcement.
Can we do an episode on show notes?
Yeah, we're gonna. There's going to be show notes in the show notes. We're actually going to link show notes to episode 204 in our show notes.
You're going to have to
So
show
there
me
you
those
go.
notes.
We're going to show those notes.
For all you alphas out there who may not know this, I was a combat photographer in the military. And so the military, the Air Force actually sent me to college. They sent me to Syracuse University, a very prestigious journalism school. And afterwards, I had a long, illustrious career as a professional photographer, still am. And I think our super producer, Holly, put in this really funny story about photoshopping photos. So I'm going to share this one with you. Please forgive me if I get disgruntled about halfway through it, but here we go. From August to December 2024, Marine recruits in San Diego had dress blue coats and covers photoshopped onto their yearbook pictures. I can't even get through the first sentence without getting disgruntled. These often embarrassing, as we all know, we never look good in our basic training photos. But anyway, these often embarrassing pictures are treasured by Marines' families and predominantly displayed on their mantles, even though, as Adam Driver's boot camp photo shows, they are not so glamorous glamour shots. But for some reason, some recent Marine recruits, the uniforms in their photos were photoshopped. That makes no sense to me. Quote, from approximately August 2024 to December 2024, a contracted photography vendor experimented with photoshopping dress blue blouses and covers on MCRD San Diego recruit yearbook photos in an attempt to streamline the process and to ensure uniformity. This is some utter bullshit. Marine Corps spokesman Captain Austin Gallegos told Task and Purpose, quote, this effort was independent of official MCRD. Oh my God, you Marine Corps and your acronyms. I'm just going to cut to this. this operations activities. The leadership of MCRD San Diego decided to discontinue the digital version of the coats and covers after reviewing the process, quote, to ensure it is aligned with the Marine Corps' high standards of representation and authenticity. Of course, because Photoshop isn't frickin' real. Give me a break. Quote, following feedback from depot leadership and other stakeholders and a careful review of potential implications of authenticity and alignment with Marine Corps traditions, the vendor reverted to traditional approach of photographing recruits in the physical coats and covers. No, duh. This isn't freaking Instagram, you guys. This decision was made to preserve the credibility of the recruit yearbook photos and maintain the trust of both internal and external audiences. Gunnery Sergeant Taylor Yance, that's quite the name, a Marine recruiter who shares content on social media about the Corps, made December 2nd video about how he had learned that recruits were having their dress uniform coats and covers photoshopped on or during boot camp. Quote, they go to the same studio, stand in the same location, but now they're in the green skivvy shirt and their camouflage bottoms, Jan said in the video. They look at the camera, snap a picture, and then someone goes in after the fact, photoshops on a coat, photoshops on a cover, and those are the pictures you get. This is utter nonsense. It is so stupid, you guys.
I'm so happy.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. This feels like, okay, I may be dating myself because, I'm old, but there used to be a time where you could take out a paper doll, and they had like little perforated dresses, and you could fold over the dress doll corners. I feel like this is one of those situations only in the digital form. You could just digitally fold over the uniform over the Marine's outfit. Anyway, photoshopping on coats and covers has pluses and minuses. A source with the knowledge of the matter told Task and Purpose, no, I have to argue there is no freaking time or place when anybody should ever Photoshop on a hat or a uniform, period.
Unless it's for comedic purposes. And then I'm okay with it.
If it's personal, sure, but if it's real life, this is utter nonsense. On the one hand, it shortens the photo taking process for 2 to 3 hours. I don't give a shit. If you're getting paid to do a job, take your time and do it right. I don't care what freaking.
I think they were just trying to be efficient and economical with government resources and time. Well,
I'm going to tell that to the wrench turners on your helicopters.
Save time.
Let's be efficient. Don't use those nuts and bolts. Giving drill instructors more time to put the recruits through physical and educational training, but they also get less of a break. In other words, photoshopping uniforms means more time for such boot camp classics as sweep up all the sunshine on the parade deck and chase the airplane flying out of the San Diego International Airport, or just another hour and a half of burpees and push-ups. This is what I'm saying, you guys.
Maybe it's just an opportunity to retrain in their Photoshop abilities, because that's really the problem here, right?
These contractors are typically civilians, and they're making hand over fist money. And yeah, there's no excuse to cut corners anywhere, period. And that it is just ludicrous what happened here. And let me just finish out this. It's probably for the best that they are back to doing it the old way. They've gone back to the old way. I think that's authenticity over shortening time. I'm just saying, if you want to check out the article, it's going to be in the show notes. It's under Task and Purpose. They did an article about it. Just say no to Photoshop if you're looking for authenticity. Keep it real, people. Keep it real.
I ran into someone that I have seen on Facebook periodically for the last decade and a half. And
did you tell me you were sorry for running into them?
Did not recognize them. These filters are dangerous. I did not recognize. I legitimately thought that this person was one of my teachers, and they were one of my fellow students that I went to school with like 20-something years ago. Yeah.
So you're saying people find their best picture and they use that no matter how much they may no longer represent that picture online to misrepresent who they actually are? I can't believe this.
And then somebody gets paid. I'm so curious how much they got paid to do this, because I think that at a certain point, whoever come up with this idea should have talked to the boot camp instructors. There's no world where the boot camp instructors are like, yeah, let's Photoshop those pictures on and not let them take their pictures in uniform. Like, those pictures are the pictures they use. And like, we're joking around, but let's get real here. Those pictures are the ones they use if we lose somebody in combat.
Yeah.
I don't want a
Exactly.
photoshopped effing picture of somebody that I love. I want a picture of that person. I want them in that uniform. They look awkward because we're all kids when we go through basic. We just are.
Exactly.
And just let that be a genuine, real thing, a real moment where you get to look and see that person go from that person to what we can eventually grow into without Photoshop.
Joe, thank
Couldn't
you
agree
so
more.
much.
Couldn't agree more. Well said. All right, guys. Well, that's it for this episode. Any final thoughts, Stacey or Joe? It's a good
All
episode.
you ladies, don't forget, get yourself registered. Happy veterans, Veterans Day.
I love the ladies.
All right, Alphas, thanks for listening. You can subscribe to our podcast, our newsletter, or send us mail and guest recommendations at legion.org/Tango Alpha Lima. We'll see you next week.